In the opulent mansion of billionaire Roman Eastman, Brianna Lewis, a black philanthropist, faces humiliating racial bias from a police officer. What begins as a personal affront quickly escalates into a powerful story of resilience and activism as Brianna, with the help of unexpected allies, leverages her resources to expose a pattern of systemic racism within the police department and beyond. This is a tale of how one woman's courage can transform a single act of prejudice into a movement for meaningful change, proving that even in the most exclusive circles, truth and justice can prevail. Like, comment, and subscribe for more heartwarming and inspiring stories. Let us know where you're watching from. Luxury never fails to dazzle those who witness it for the first time. When Brianna Lewis, a passionate black philanthropist on a mission, stepped into the glittering halls of billionaire Roman Eastman's mansion, she expected to discuss funding opportunities for her community initiatives. What she never anticipated was a humiliating encounter with a suspicious cop determined to prove she didn't belong. In that single night, beneath chandeliers worth more than entire neighborhoods, Brianna's world was upended. Yet in the midst of indignity, she rallied powerful allies, leveraged her own resources, and ignited a cascade of revelations that would redefine not just her future, but an entire system. Brianna Lewis had spent most of her adult life building a nonprofit dedicated to supporting youth entrepreneurship. Her days involved relentless fundraising, balancing spreadsheets, and forging relationships with local business owners. Despite her professional successes, she still managed to keep a low profile in the grand scheme of high society. That was why an engraved invitation bearing the name Roman Eastman took her by surprise. She had heard of Roman Eastman through philanthropic circles and breathless media coverage. His empire spanned real estate, venture capital, and a line of luxury eco-resorts. Every year he hosted a gala in his palatial Connecticut home, a sprawling mansion that overlooked the Atlantic and boasted more marble than most museums. Rumors floated that if you caught his interest, one good conversation could translate into a $1 million check for your cause. So when the invitation arrived, Brianna wondered, why me? A quick chat with a mutual acquaintance revealed that Roman was intrigued by her nonprofit's practical approach to helping young people start small businesses. The chance to pitch her proposals to not only Roman, but also other wealthy donors was too big to ignore. The night of the gala was unusually warm for early autumn. Brianna drove herself from New Haven to Roman's estate, feeling the weight of the event. She wore a sleek black gown, modest but elegant. Her hair, styled in a natural puff, gave her a regal silhouette. As she handed her keys to the valet, she inhaled the crisp sea air, reminding herself, this is just another meeting, albeit with more zeros attached. Inside, the opulence dazzled. Glittering chandeliers, sweeping staircases, curated art that spanned centuries. Women in couture gowns and men in tailored tuxedos drifted through the foyer, brandishing polite smiles and refined laughter. Brianna clutched her invitation, heart thumping in her ears. A staff member guided her toward the main salon, a grand space with gilded ceilings and walls lined with priceless paintings. She soon spotted Roman, standing among a small circle of VIP guests. He was tall, his hair silver at the temples, dressed in a crisp blue suit. His easy charm and broad smile put others at ease. When she approached, he broke off his conversation, greeting her warmly. Brianna Lewis, he said, extending a hand. I've heard great things. Thank you for making the trip out here. Her pulse steadied. It's an honor, Mr. Eastman. Your support could transform the next phase of our programs. Roman's eyes lit with genuine interest. Please call me Roman. We'll talk more once the crowd settles. For now, make yourself at home. The place is big, but you'll find friendly faces all around. Brianna strolled through clusters of guests, exchanging introductions. Some recognized her name from local press or philanthropic events. A few even promised to connect her with new contacts. She glimpsed an impressive array of big names, a tech CEO rumored to be the next Warren Buffett, a Hollywood director known for activism, and even a Smithsonian curator raving about newly discovered artifacts. Though half entranced by the mansion's magnificence, Brianna remained focused on her mission, persuading donors that small business mentorship could break cycles of poverty. She sipped sparkling water, quietly rehearsing her pitch. After an hour of mingling, she retreated to a quieter wing of the house to catch her breath. That was when she first noticed him, a uniformed figure standing near a corridor, scanning passers-by with a hawkish stare. She assumed he was on-duty security, though it was odd that Roman relied on an actual police presence instead of private guards. His gaze lingered on her, but she brushed it off, attributing it to standard vigilance. Little did she suspect that this officer's suspicion would soon focus on her with alarming force. Nor could she predict how the humiliation to come would set off a domino effect of revelations, a conflict that would bring Roman Eastman's philanthropic realm under scrutiny and rewrite the rules of who truly held power in these polished circles. For now, Brianna merely felt a brief, inexplicable chill. Shaking it away, she headed back toward the main salon, reminding herself that this was her chance to secure a brighter future for countless young entrepreneurs. She had no inkling she was about to become an unwitting symbol of something far bigger than a single fundraising pitch. Officer Bradley Grant had patrolled these gilded events for nearly 5 years, earning a steady income, moonlighting as additional security detail. In a typical night, he'd redirect lost guests or keep watch for potential theft. It was a relatively easy assignment with minimal drama. But in the lavish hush of Roman Eastman's mansion, something in him bristled with suspicion whenever he saw an unfamiliar face, especially if they didn't fit his entrenched assumptions of who belonged. He first spotted Brianna Lewis by a hallway arch, scanning a wall of antique portraits. She was elegantly dressed, but Officer Grant's instinct told him she might be out of place. Could she be a reporter hunting for gossip? He wondered, or worse, someone with a hidden agenda. He loitered in the corridor, monitoring guests under the guise of routine vigilance. As the evening progressed, he noted how Brianna alternated between polite conversation and moments alone. His mind churned with prejudice, conflating her calm demeanor with something more nefarious. When he finally approached her, Brianna was studying a bronze sculpture in a less crowded gallery. A hush pervaded the space, broken only by faint music from the main hall. She startled at his firm voice behind her. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said. "Might I see your invitation or ID?" She turned, surprise giving way to confusion. "Sure, may I ask why?" Officer Grant's stare carried the weight of silent judgment. "Routine check. This area isn't meant for general guests." Brianna's brows knitted. "The staff said guests could move around freely, except for private offices or the third-floor wing." "I must not have realized," he cut her off. "Show me your invitation." Under that steely gaze, she retrieved the elegant cardstock from her small purse. He held it for a moment, barely glancing at the embossed crest before handing it back. "And your ID?" he added. Slightly rattled, she produced her driver's license. He studied it with a slow scrutiny that felt invasive. "Ms. Brianna Lewis from New Haven," he read aloud, then locked eyes with her. "You come alone?" "Yes," she answered evenly. "I run a non-profit, and Roman Eastman invited me personally to discuss potential funding." Officer Grant made a show of handing back her ID with obvious reluctance. "We've had issues with uninvited individuals at these upscale events. If you're here legitimately, keep to the main gala areas." Her pulse quickened. "I've done nothing wrong. This is a normal part of the mansion open to guests." He shrugged, ignoring her frustration. "Ma'am, I'll escort you back to the main salon. We can confirm with the host, if needed." At first she considered simply acquiescing, but the indignity flared. "That's not necessary," she insisted. "I'm on my way there anyway." He drew closer, voice low. "Let's make sure." A flicker of alarm coursed through her. She realized he wasn't politely guiding her. He was detaining her under suspicion. But suspicion of what? The corridor was empty, giving them no audience to interrupt. She disliked the power he held in uniform, the potential for a single false move to turn catastrophic. Holding her head high, she stifled her resentment. "Very well," she said, stepping toward the broader hallway. He followed, one hand near his belt, as if expecting her to bolt. They traversed a route that wound past countless guests, none of whom paid more than a curious glance at the pair. Brianna felt heat rising in her cheeks. "I can't believe this is happening." Eventually, they arrived at a small lounge room near the mansion's side entrance. Officer Grant directed her to step inside. "Wait here," he ordered. "I'll fetch the event coordinator to confirm your story." She bristled. My story? You speak like I'm lying. His silence spoke volumes. He stepped out, leaving the door cracked. Brianna stood alone in the lavishly decorated lounge, its Persian rug and velvet sofas offering little comfort. Her heart hammered with a mix of humiliation and anger. Minutes passed with excruciating slowness. She pictured every scenario. What if he calls the wrong staff member? What if I'm accused of trespassing or theft? Will I be forcibly removed? She tried to calm herself by recalling Roman Eastman's explicit invitation, but her mind kept replaying the officer's cold stare. At last, a staff member named Angela entered, face drawn in worry. She recognized Brianna from earlier introductions. Ms. Lewis, is everything okay? Brianna exhaled relief. This officer decided I'm suspicious. He demanded to see my ID, forced me to come here. Angela shook her head with exasperation. I'll clarify this right away. Mr. Eastman will not be pleased. She hurried out, presumably to retrieve someone with authority, maybe Roman himself. Left alone again, Brianna stared at the silent phone in her hand, resisting the urge to text acquaintances about the humiliating fiasco. Stay composed, she reminded herself. This is not the end of the world. But the raw sting of being treated like a criminal in an environment that prided itself on elegance and inclusion gnawed at her. Eventually, Angela returned with Celeste Hooper, one of Roman's closest aides. Celeste recognized Brianna instantly. Oh my gosh, Miss Lewis, I'm sorry. Let's sort this out. Officer Grant slipped in behind them, adopting a defensive stance. She was in an off-limits area, he said curtly. I have reason to believe. Celeste cut him off. She's a VIP guest tonight. There's no reason to suspect her of anything. Grant's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Celeste gently placed a hand on Brianna's shoulder. Come with me, Ms. Lewis. I'll ensure this doesn't happen again. They exited together, leaving Officer Grant scowling in the lounge. As they moved through the corridor, Celeste apologized profusely, promising that Roman would hear about this. Brianna's cheeks burned. The humiliation felt fresh. How could this happen at a supposedly philanthropic event? Returning to the main salon, she forced a brittle smile at the swirling conversations. Celeste guided her toward Roman Eastman, who was engrossed in discussion with an esteemed art patron. The cop's suspicion had wrecked her composure, but she still held on to a flicker of pride. She refused to let bigotry overshadow her mission. Her immediate plan, address the matter discreetly, but ensure it didn't vanish under the mansion's gilded rugs. The question loomed. Would Roman Eastman protect his guest's dignity or allow this officer's bias to remain hidden under a veil of security? Either way, Brianna sensed a turning point. This wasn't merely a personal slight. It hinted at a deeper rot, one she'd soon expose, igniting consequences that would ripple far beyond Roman's ornate estate. Brianna rejoined the main gala with Celeste at her side, head held high despite the hurt roiling inside. Roman Eastman broke from his conversation as soon as he saw them approach. Concern etched his features when Celeste whispered a summary of what had happened. In front of a handful of onlookers, Roman apologized to Brianna. I'm so sorry you were treated this way. I assure you Officer Grant overstepped his authority. This is not how I want my events to run. His sincerity soothed her raw nerves slightly, yet she kept her voice measured. Thank you, Mr. Eastman. I appreciate your apology, but this can't be brushed aside. Roman nodded. We'll talk privately soon. Meanwhile, let me introduce you to some folks who can support your nonprofit. I don't want this incident overshadowing your important work. Before she could respond, she noticed the curious gazes of a few guests. Word was already spreading. She caught a glimpse of Celeste discreetly summoning a staffer who hurried away, likely to deal with Officer Grant. At least I won't see him prowling around again tonight, Brianna thought grimly. Roman led her toward a small group conversing near a window with sweeping garden views. Among them was Janice Chang, CEO of a major social impact fund, and Dr. Marcus Reese, a professor known for bridging academia and business in underprivileged regions. Brianna recognized them as influential gatekeepers who could catapult her nonprofit's visibility. Summoning her grace, Brianna launched into an overview of her organization's track record, how microgrants and mentorship had helped dozens of young entrepreneurs create stable incomes. Despite the earlier humiliation, she spoke with calm assurance. Dr. Reese asked thoughtful questions about the success metrics, while Janice Chang inquired about scaling beyond Connecticut. They seemed impressed. Janice mentioned the possibility of a pilot program in collaboration with her fund, and Dr. Reese invited Brianna to speak at his university's upcoming symposium. Through it all, Roman Eastman hovered supportively, chiming in about the potential synergy. Brianna's spirits lifted. She realized that tonight's fiasco, as demeaning as it was, wouldn't destroy her prospects. If anything, Roman appeared determined to compensate for Officer Grant's behavior by championing her cause more emphatically. However, she couldn't fully relax. At the edges of the salon, she noticed hushes of conversation, sideways glances in her direction. She guessed that rumors about the security incident had spread. Some guests seemed outraged on her behalf. Others, she suspected, clung to the idea that the cop must have had some reason to suspect her. This pricked her pride anew, underscoring the subtle prejudices lurking even in philanthropic circles. During a short lull, Roman signaled that they could step aside for a private talk. He guided her into a smaller parlor room, richly furnished, yet cozy enough for candid conversation. Once inside, he closed the door, eyebrows knitted with sincerity. "Ms. Lewis, I want you to know I value your presence here. Officer Grant was out of line. I've already requested that he leave the premises," Roman said. "However, let me be frank. Our local precinct has a close relationship with wealthy residents. Sometimes they send certain officers on these off-duty gigs. I never imagined one would behave so unprofessionally." Brianna folded her arms. "I appreciate your immediate action, but it's not enough to dismiss him. This is personal for me, and I believe indicative of a larger problem. I'm hardly the only Black person who's been humiliated or seen as suspicious for simply existing in these spaces." Roman's expression grew thoughtful. "You're right. This is bigger than one incident. Let me help. If you want to lodge a formal complaint, I'll back you publicly. My name carries weight with city officials." Her pulse fluttered. She hadn't expected such direct support. "I do want to file a complaint, yes. He should be accountable. And if there are others like him, the department needs to know." Roman exhaled. "Then let's do it. I'll have my assistant connect you with legal counsel. We'll ensure the city's oversight committee hears your story. People might question your account, but I'll make sure they know the truth." Warmth spread in her chest, gratitude laced with lingering frustration. If only all wealthy figures used their influence this way. She said quietly, "Thank you. This means more than you realize." He patted her shoulder gently. "You focus on your foundation. Let me handle the bureaucratic side," and he hesitated. "If you prefer to leave now, I understand, but I'd love for you to stay and keep networking. Don't let that officer rob you of this opportunity." Brianna squared her shoulders. "I'll stay. My foundation needs these connections. I won't let him define my night." Roman smiled, genuine relief evident. "Good. We still have people you should meet. In fact, Janice Chang already told me she's eager to talk specifics about partnership." Re-entering the main salon, Brianna braced herself for secondhand whispers. Instead, she encountered an outpouring of kindness from many corners. Guests who'd caught wind of the incident, offering apologies or words of support. She even discovered that a journalist named Lucia Hernandez from Philanthropy Weekly wanted an interview about her nonprofit. Somewhere amid the swirl of music and polite laughter, Brianna realized that, ironically, Officer Grant's bigotry had boosted her visibility. People sought her out, wanting to hear about the mission of bridging community wealth gaps. Perhaps they felt a moral imperative to counter the ugliness they had glimpsed. Yet beneath that wave of goodwill, Brianna sensed an undercurrent. In hushed corners, a few skeptics mumbled about the race card or questioned why the officer might randomly suspect her. She turned a deaf ear, refusing to indulge that toxic ignorance. As the evening waned, she found Celeste again, who confirmed that Officer Grant had indeed been asked to leave. "He didn't go quietly," Celeste confided, "but Roman is adamant. We'll file an official complaint tomorrow." The mansion's grandeur persisted around them, but Brianna felt profoundly changed. What began as a chance to pitch her nonprofit had evolved into a moral stand. Will the city's police leadership brush this aside? Or will I have to fight tooth and nail for justice? She wondered. She decided that no matter how daunting, she'd see this through. With Roman's backing and the sympathy of many present, she had more leverage than others who might have faced similar humiliation. This can't be just about me, she resolved. If I can use this moment to challenge discrimination, then something good might sprout from tonight's pain. She left the mansion in the early hours, the memory of Officer Grant's harsh stare etched in her mind. Despite the sting, she carried a new sense of purpose. The next steps would be crucial, forging alliances to ensure the humiliator became the humiliated. And maybe in that process, she'd open doors for those who, in different circumstances, had no voice at all. Early the next morning, Brianna awoke with a restless energy. She emailed her staff a quick update, explaining she'd secured promising leads from Roman's gala, but had also faced an incident of bias. Then she prepared for a day that promised few certainties. Lodging a complaint against an off-duty policeman with a reputation for intimidation. By 9 o'clock, she was in Roman Eastman's Manhattan office, an elegant suite high in a glass tower overlooking Central Park. She met Roman's legal counsel, Asha Quinton, a poised attorney known for winning tough civil rights cases. Celeste sat in as well, her presence offering moral support. Asha explained the process. Officer Bradley Grant is employed by the local PD. We'll file an official complaint with Internal Affairs. You'll provide a sworn statement describing his unjustified detention and humiliating behavior. Mr. Eastman will corroborate your invitation status and confirm the property's layout. Brianna swallowed. Do we have to worry about backlash? Police unions can be powerful. Asha nodded. Yes, they often circle the wagons, but we have strong evidence. A legitimate invitation, multiple witnesses, and a well-respected billionaire host to confirm your account. If the department tries to bury this, we can escalate. We could even file a lawsuit if necessary. Roman leaned forward, expression resolute. I'm prepared to testify that I personally invited you. My staff can confirm the corridor you were in wasn't restricted. No one else was subjected to that treatment. This officer singled you out. Bolstered by their support, Brianna recounted the incident in painstaking detail. Asha took notes, pausing only to clarify times or the sequence of events. She assured Brianna that the presence of Celeste and Angela, the staffer, as witnesses, strengthened the case. How quickly will Internal Affairs respond? Brianna asked, anxiety creeping in. Hard to say, Asha replied gently. It can take weeks for them to open a formal investigation. But with Mr. Eastman's name attached, they'll likely expedite. A hush settled. Brianna's stomach churned at the realization of how official and drawn out the process might be. She forced a steady breath. I can't let the timeline deter me. After finalizing the complaint documents, Roman offered a quiet aside. I know this might overshadow your nonprofit's mission, but we can't allow bigotry to remain unchecked. If any donors have concerns, I'll reassure them. No one should lose interest in your important work just because you're standing up for yourself. She managed a thankful smile. That means a lot. I won't let my cause be hijacked by negativity, but I won't be silent either. They ended the meeting, determined to keep each other informed. As Brianna stepped out onto the bustling Midtown sidewalk, the skyscrapers loomed overhead, symbolizing the power structures she was confronting. She checked her phone, already flooding with messages from philanthropic acquaintances, presumably gossiping about the incident. Within an hour, she received an unexpected call from a journalist at the New Haven Register. She debated whether to speak. After a moment's thought, she picked up, bracing for inquiry. Ms. Lewis, we've heard you had a run-in with an officer at Roman Eastman's gala. Any statement? Her pulse quickened. She recalled Asha's advice to remain factual, but to avoid naming the officer until the complaint was official. I can confirm an incident of unjustified detainment occurred, she said carefully. Mr. Eastman and I are filing a complaint with Internal Affairs. I hope the process leads to accountability and fosters better community relations. The journalist pressed for more, but Brianna refused to offer details that might sabotage the official complaint. Hanging up, she realized she was stepping into the public eye in a way she never intended. I must stay composed, she thought, recalling her nonprofit staff and the entrepreneurs who depended on her programs. Over the next days, news of the complaint spread, at first as a trickle in local media, then more widely among philanthropic circles. Some responded with shock and condemnation of Officer Grant's behavior. Others, typically more conservative voices, grumbled about overblown accusations or security concerns at fancy parties. Brianna found herself balancing two roles: founder of a growing nonprofit and reluctant advocate for victims of bias. She endured backhanded remarks from certain individuals, mostly older donors who muttered about law and order. Yet she also discovered new supporters, people who admired her courage to speak up. Roman staff updated her regularly, stating that the police department's upper ranks seemed uneasy. Officer Grant, apparently, had faced prior complaints that vanished for lack of clout or evidence. With Roman's backing, those old accusations might resurface. If that happened, it could crack open a history of intimidation. Celeste occasionally phoned, making sure Brianna was emotionally intact. If it gets overwhelming, Mr. Eastman suggests hiring a PR consultant, or we can coordinate statements so you're not blindsided, she said. Brianna appreciated the offer but tried to handle most queries herself. Authenticity felt crucial. One late afternoon, as she wrapped up at her nonprofit office, her phone buzzed with a blocked caller ID. Frowning, she answered. No one spoke at first, then a man's voice. "Are you satisfied, making trouble for a good officer?" "Some of us see through your act." The line clicked dead before she could reply. She stood frozen, heart pounding. A threat or just intimidation? Fear licked at her resolve. She reminded herself that she had powerful allies now. She jotted the time and nature of the call, planning to tell Asha. Fear gave way to quiet anger. They want me silent, but I won't back down. In the following weeks, the city's philanthropic sphere buzzed with the talk of that humiliating fiasco. People invited Brianna to speak on panels about inclusivity, which she hesitantly accepted to keep the conversation constructive. Slowly, she realized that her complaint wasn't just personal. It shone a spotlight on a broader pattern of policing prejudice that thrived in exclusive enclaves where many felt too intimidated to speak. One evening, she scrolled social media, seeing hashtags rallying around her name, some supportive, some dismissive. She posted a brief statement highlighting her nonprofit's mission to uplift communities and clarifying that her stand against Officer Grant's misconduct was part of ensuring everyone, everywhere, could be treated with respect. The post gained traction, likes, and shares. Thus, the complaint took on a life of its own, marking the first major strike in an unfolding battle. Brianna recognized it as a precarious victory, precarious because official processes were notoriously opaque and power often concealed. But she had stepped into the ring with Roman Eastman at her side, and if the police department tried to deflect, she was ready. Little did she know events would soon accelerate. Old victims of Grant might step forward, journalists might dig up new revelations, and the philanthropic community would be forced to confront uncomfortable truths. For now, she cherished the knowledge that in a society so prone to looking away, she had taken a stand, filing a complaint that no longer allowed those in power to feign ignorance. Weeks passed. Brianna's life bounced between intense nonprofit work, expanding microgrants, connecting with new donors, and the looming tension of the police investigation. The Internal Affairs Department remained tight-lipped about their progress, but Roman Eastman's counsel, Asha Quinton, assured Brianna that the complaint was advancing. Then an unexpected shift occurred. Individuals started contacting Brianna directly, sharing their own experiences with Officer Grant. The first was a woman named Teresa Poole, a caterer who had once served at an upscale fundraiser. She recounted how Grant searched her van for contraband, leaving her humiliated and behind schedule. "I never filed a complaint because I needed the gig," Teresa explained over a phone call, voice trembling with old frustration. "But when I saw your name in the news, I felt I should speak up." Next came Mark Hinson, a videographer for private events, who described a near-identical ordeal. "He threatened to arrest me because I used a side entrance to load equipment," Mark said bitterly. "Said I looked suspicious. I was working for goodness sake." In total, 5 people reached out, all from service industries linked to exclusive events. Their stories echoed the pattern: harassment, baseless searches, intimidation, all inflicted by an officer confident he wouldn't be challenged. The difference now was that, with Brianna's high-profile complaint, they felt emboldened to step forward. Brianna documented their accounts meticulously. Asha advised that these testimonies could bolster her complaint, showcasing a broader pattern. Roman Eastman signaled readiness to publicize these stories if the department tried to brush off the investigation. It's not just one slip-up, he said, eyebrows furrowed. It's systematic abuse. Meanwhile, local media caught wind. A thoughtful columnist at the Hartford Courant wrote a piece about the hidden gatekeeping that often happened at swanky parties. He cited Brianna's complaint as the tip of an iceberg, calling for deeper scrutiny of how off-duty cops policed guests and service staff. Unsurprisingly, Officer Grant and his supporters pushed back. In an article published by a right-leaning blog, an anonymous source from the precinct claimed that Grant was being targeted unfairly and that guests in these circles want to flaunt rules without consequence. The spin attempted to paint Brianna as an opportunist. Brianna flinched at the suggestion. She recognized the rhetoric. Anytime a marginalized person stood up against injustice, there were always accusations of playing victim for personal gain. She refused to respond directly, letting Roman's PR team handle the noise. One afternoon, Roman invited her to a short meeting at his philanthropic foundation office, away from the hustle of his corporate headquarters. She arrived to find him poring over statements from those who'd contacted Brianna. "Look at these stories," he said grimly. "Officer Grant's brazen. I wonder how many others never came forward." Asha joined them, proposing they gather these accounts in an open letter to the city's mayor, the police chief, and the public oversight board. If they see that it's not just Ms. Lewis and that people from catering to entertainment have faced this, pressure will mount. Brianna nodded, still processing the weight of it all. "Yes, but we need permission from each victim to include their names," she cautioned. "Some might fear losing future gigs." They agreed to use aliases or keep individuals anonymous if they preferred. Roman offered to fund a small team to handle interviews, ensuring the process was done professionally. He also hinted that a press conference might be on the horizon if IA didn't respond adequately. Her eyes roamed the tranquil office, adorned with photographs of Roman's past philanthropic projects, rebuilding schools, funding medical clinics. The scale of his influence was undeniable, and she felt a wave of gratitude that he'd chosen to stand with her. "But I must not rely solely on him," she reminded herself. "Our cause needs broad-based support." That evening, she attended a small dinner hosted by a local civil rights organization. She was invited to share her experience, and in return, the group offered strategic guidance on dealing with police unions, city officials, and public perception. They also introduced her to an activist named Dion Jacobs, who specialized in collecting data on discriminatory policing. Dion promised to channel any relevant stats he found into her case. Within days, the swirl of activism around Brianna's complaint grew. Allies emerged from unexpected quarters. A retired judge who believed in justice, a high-tech CEO who offered to fund a media campaign, even a local pastor who provided moral support and prayers for a transformation in how we see each other. Pressures on the city's police department escalated. They issued a terse statement. "We take all allegations seriously and continue a thorough internal review of Officer Grant's conduct." That dryness hinted at behind-the-scenes turmoil, especially as more witnesses spoke up. For her part, Brianna found strength in these alliances. No longer an isolated victim, she became a galvanizing force. The media labeled her the philanthropic activist, which she viewed with mixed emotions. She never set out to be an activist, just a woman who refused to accept humiliation. But if that label helped others confront the same injustice, she'd wear it proudly. By the month's end, the momentum was undeniable. As she scrolled through her phone late one night, she saw a trending hashtag, #Stand with Brianna. People from across the country were tweeting support. Some shared personal accounts of being profiled. Others called for a national conversation about off-duty policing at wealthy events. Staring at the phone, she experienced a strange mix of pride and sorrow. Pride that her courage sparked real dialogue. Sorrow that it was needed in the first place. "This is bigger than me now," she mused, turning off the screen. "It's about transforming a system that lets prejudice fester behind gilded doors." Despite the swirl of activism, she kept a steady focus on her nonprofit's mission, reminding herself that economic empowerment and social justice were deeply intertwined. If a single policeman's arrogance had led her here, so be it. She was determined to turn that negative spark into a beacon for countless others, ensuring that in Roman Eastman's world and beyond, It was no longer acceptable to question the belonging of people like her. As Brianna's complaint gained traction, Officer Bradley Grant found himself increasingly cornered. Internal Affairs interviewed him twice, pressing about his past behavior at high-end events. Other officers in the precinct distanced themselves, unsure whether to defend him or remain neutral. His personal record began surfacing, allegations that had once disappeared. Late one afternoon, Grant decided to go on the offensive. Through a friend who ran a small but inflammatory online publication, he agreed to an exclusive interview. The result was a sensational piece that labeled Brianna an ungrateful opportunist milking accusations of racism. Grant insisted he'd only demanded her ID because she was in a restricted area, and that her overreaction undermined real policing. The blog post generated a flurry of divisive comments. Some readers sided with Grant, decrying false racism claims. Others blasted him for blaming the victim. Brianna discovered the article the next morning when a concerned colleague sent her the link. She read it, pulse racing. The vitriol stung, though she recognized the piece as a last-ditch effort to salvage his reputation. Hurt threatened to overshadow her reason, but she steadied herself. She consulted Asha Quinton, who said they could consider a defamation angle if false statements harmed her nonprofit's standing. However, Roman Eastman's PR advisor recommended against engaging directly. He wants you to get into a public spat, the advisor warned. Stay above it. Let the facts speak. Despite trying to remain calm, Brianna noticed a subtle shift in certain philanthropic circles. A handful of potential donors quietly postponed meetings, citing the controversy. She suspected some were wary of being dragged into a messy public debate. Others, though, stood staunchly by her side, urging her to keep going. Around the same time, a radio host from a conservative station requested an on-air debate between Brianna and Grant. Her immediate reaction was to decline. She had no interest in a shouting match. The host persisted, framing it as balance, but she politely refused, determined to fight on her own terms. One evening, as she left her office, she spotted a police car idling across the street. A flicker of paranoia seized her. Is that random, or are they watching me? She drove home with a jittery sense of being tailed, though she saw no direct evidence. Once home, she locked the door and called a friend, confessing her fear. At midnight, she received another anonymous call, a disembodied voice muttering, "You'll regret this." She trembled, quickly blocking the number. She refused to let intimidation derail her. However, she documented each incident, sharing details with Asha and Roman's security staff. Roman even offered to hire personal security for her, but she declined, feeling it might escalate tensions. Gradually, local news outlets picked up on Grant's smear campaign. One anchor reported that, while Officer Grant claims Ms. Lewis was simply uncooperative, multiple witnesses confirm her invitation and her calm demeanor. The newscaster also cited testimonies from Teresa Poole and Mark Hinson, revealing the officer's repeated pattern of harassing working-class people at wealthy events. Grant's interview began to backfire. The more he accused Brianna of faking victimhood, the more counter-evidence surfaced. The city's philanthropic community, having read details of how he treated caterers and staff, leaned toward disowning him. Even those initially uncertain recognized a pattern in his hostility. In this environment, Roman Eastman organized a small press briefing at his foundation. He stood at a podium, flanked by Celeste and Asha Quinton, with Brianna at his side. Cameras flashed as Roman succinctly summarized the situation, reaffirming Brianna's rightful presence at his event, praising her nonprofit, and condemning any attempts to discredit her. Brianna then spoke. "I never wanted a public feud, but since Officer Grant chose to launch personal attacks, I'll reiterate. I was an invited guest, I cooperated fully, and I was humiliated despite clear evidence of my legitimacy. If you doubt me, ask the many others who share similar stories about this officer." She emphasized her continued mission to expand microgrants, refusing to let negativity consume her. After the briefing, no immediate response came from Grant's side, but the public narrative clearly shifted to side with Brianna. Yet privately, she grappled with exhaustion. Each day brought calls and emails referencing the fiasco, overshadowing her nonprofit's progress. Staff members tried to shield her from negative commentary, but it seeped through. She clung to the knowledge that final resolution would come through the IA investigation. In a rare quiet moment, she took solace in a conversation with Dr. Marcus Reese, the professor who had shown interest in her pilot program. He shared words of encouragement, comparing her predicament to classic civil rights struggles. Conflict often precedes meaningful reform, he said. You stand on the shoulders of those who endured more severe harassment. Your stance will further that legacy. Emboldened, she pressed on. Each new day reaffirmed that standing up to bullies came at a cost. Stress, threats, lost donors, but also yielded a platform to champion accountability. She recognized that if she emerged victorious, it would set a precedent. Other people, especially those lacking her resources, could cite her example. Little did Officer Grant realize that his aggressive tactics only amplified Brianna's moral advantage. While he tried to intimidate her into silence, she garnered respect from the philanthropic sphere, from the media, and from ordinary citizens fed up with racially biased policing. In the swirl of it all, she reminded herself, the truth is on my side, and if he wants a fight, he's already losing the battle. The final blow would come when internal affairs delivered their verdict, one that could reshape not just one cop's career, but the broader dynamics of wealth, race, and authority in a realm of shimmering chandeliers and quiet prejudice. The tension reached a crescendo when internal affairs summoned both Brianna and Officer Grant for separate hearings. The department's official statement indicated that an internal board would review testimony and evidence before issuing a verdict. The board, comprising senior officers and an independent civilian representative, aimed to assess if Grant violated policy, or worse, engaged in racially motivated misconduct. On the day of her hearing, Brianna dressed simply but professionally. Asha Quinton and Celeste accompanied her to the station. Roman Eastman had planned to attend but was abroad for business, so he sent a public letter endorsing Brianna's account and reaffirming her invitation. A hush hovered over the corridors leading to the hearing room. Posters on the walls depicted smiling officers, community outreach pictures, an ironic contrast to the reality she was about to face. Brianna's turn to testify came mid-morning. Sergeant Connie McLaughlin, heading the inquiry, explained the procedure. We'll record your statement under oath. Please recount everything from the moment you arrived at the gala to the confrontation with Officer Grant. Swallowing her nerves, Brianna began, voice steady as she described her initial excitement about meeting donors, the chance corridor encounter, Grant's abrupt demand for ID, the humiliating detention. She referenced the staff lounge where he forced her to wait, the presence of Celeste who eventually intervened, and how Roman Eastman personally confirmed her legitimate status. She did not shy from the emotional impact, detailing how she felt singled out, presumed guilty for merely existing in a space typically reserved for the wealthy. The board listened intently, occasionally asking clarifications about times, locations, or witness identifications. Asha submitted supporting documents, the invitation, text messages with Celeste clarifying the house's open areas, and statements from the caterer and videographer who had faced similar abuse from Grant at other events. The board seemed especially interested in these corroborating testimonies, hinting they recognized a pattern. Later, Officer Grant testified in his own hearing session. Though Brianna didn't attend it, she heard from Asha's network that he doubled down on claiming Brianna acted suspiciously, refused directions, and loitered near private rooms. He also insisted he had no racial bias, portraying her accusations as exaggerated. The board took 3 days to deliberate. During that period, the local press hovered, speculating about potential outcomes: a mild reprimand, suspension, or termination. Some cynics expected the department to protect Grant with a token punishment. Others predicted a harsh penalty given the high-profile nature of the complaint. Finally, the verdict arrived. The board found Officer Grant guilty of misconduct, citing unwarranted detention, bias-based policing, and misuse of authority. They recommended immediate suspension without pay and further recommended termination pending a final sign-off by the police commissioner. A wave of relief swept over Brianna when she received the call from Sergeant McLaughlin. The official statement followed, blasted across news outlets within hours. Officers' conduct at Eastman residence violated departmental policies. Additional complaints reveal a recurring pattern. Friends and supporters flooded Brianna's phone with congratulatory messages. She exhaled tears of joy, realizing this was a pivotal milestone. She had not only cleared her name, but validated the experiences of others who had been bullied by the same officer. The philanthropic community responded swiftly. Donors who once hesitated now praised her for resilience. Some offered fresh contributions to her nonprofit, framing her victory as a symbol of moral fortitude. Meanwhile, activists championed it as a sign that even entrenched power structures could be held accountable if the right pressure was applied. For Officer Grant, the outcome was devastating. Rumors indicated he planned to appeal, calling the board's process biased. Yet internal sources suggested little sympathy for him. His track record, once concealed, was too incriminating. The union's official statement was muted, merely expressing disappointment while acknowledging they would follow procedures. Roman Eastman, having returned from abroad, hosted a modest reception at his foundation's office to celebrate the progress. He publicly commended Brianna's courage and pledged an endowment to her nonprofit, ensuring her micro-grant initiative could extend across multiple states. "This isn't hush money," he clarified with a smile in front of the press. "This is recognition that Ms. Lewis's approach works. It's a model for genuine community uplift." Brianna, feeling a deep sense of vindication, thanked him, but she also stressed that the fight against discrimination wasn't over. "One officer's downfall doesn't magically fix systemic biases," she told reporters. "We have to keep pushing for reforms, like better training, independent oversight, and real consequences for misconduct." That night, she stood alone in her small apartment, gazing at the city lights. The swirl of the last few weeks felt surreal. She had prevailed, turning the tables on a policeman who assumed she could be easily silenced. Now her name was associated not just with bridging entrepreneurs to capital, but bridging justice to those historically denied it. Instead of celebrating with champagne, she opted for a quiet gratitude. She texted Celeste a simple message: "Thank you for everything. Onward from here." She then closed her eyes, letting the tension seep from her muscles, at last able to breathe easier. Tomorrow promised new beginnings for her nonprofit's expanded reach, for those Officer Grant had once harassed, and for a city forced to reckon with prejudice in places of wealth. The humiliation that began in Roman Eastman's mansion ended in a moral triumph that reverberated far beyond its gilded corridors. 3 months after Officer Grant's suspension, Roman Eastman organized another fundraiser, this time explicitly themed around inclusive philanthropy. He called it the Rebuilding Trust Gala, inviting a broader range of community leaders, nonprofits, and yes, even a few moderate voices from law enforcement who wanted to see reform from within. Brianna initially hesitated to attend. The last time she walked those corridors, she left with her dignity battered. But Roman insisted, explaining that the event would showcase how the philanthropic elite could unite with grassroots efforts to dismantle systemic inequalities. "Besides," he added, "you have to see how the mansion's ambiance changes when it's filled with genuine compassion instead of quiet judgment." Deciding it could further her nonprofit's mission, she arrived dressed in a flowing emerald green dress, a color she rarely wore, but chose now as a statement of renewal. The same valet greeted her, eyes lighting up with recognition. "Welcome back, Ms. Lewis," he said cheerfully, a far cry from the tension-laden greeting months earlier. Inside, the mansion's grand salon buzzed with a different energy. Instead of purely high society small talk, discussions about social equity and police accountability filled the air. Panels replaced aimless mingling. One featured representatives from the Police Oversight Committee, explaining new guidelines for off-duty policing. Another showcased successful entrepreneurs from Brianna's microgrant program, their stories highlighting the ripple effect of small financial boosts. Standing near a table of refreshments, Brianna sensed eyes upon her, but this time in admiration, not suspicion. She overheard a cluster of guests praising her advocacy. Words like inspiring, transformational, and brave floated around. A few well-wishers approached, offering firm handshakes or polite embraces. She nodded in appreciation, heart swelling with cautious hope that perhaps the culture here really could change. A hush fell when Roman took the microphone. He welcomed the crowd, then invited Brianna to join him on stage. Once under the lights, she spotted a large projection behind them, showing photos of her nonprofit's accomplishments, thriving small shops, farmers markets, youth trainings. This is the woman whose perseverance not only drew my philanthropic support, Roman said, but also proved that prejudice can't stand when confronted by truth. Let's applaud Ms. Lewis for pushing all of us to do better. Thunderous applause followed. Brianna felt a lump in her throat. She gave a short speech. Gratitude to those who believed in her work. A reminder that policing reform remains a collective responsibility and a challenge to the wealthy to fund more inclusive economic models. As she left the stage, she spotted Dr. Marcus Reese and Janice Chang in the front row, beaming at her. They had both formed partnerships with her foundation, expanding microgrants to new regions. Their presence reaffirmed that the humiliating incident had, paradoxically, propelled her cause forward more than any quiet pitch ever could. During a break, a small group of local activists approached. One woman, Ebony Thompson, using a real name for reliability, tearfully shared how she once avoided these upscale events, dreading the scrutiny that so often dogged Black attendees. "Your stand gave me courage," Ebony said softly. "Now I realize we have as much right to be in these spaces as anyone." Tears of empathy shimmered in Brianna's eyes. She nodded. "We do. And if we keep challenging prejudice, we'll make these places welcoming for the next generation too." Across the room, she recognized one or two faces from the old guard, people who once whispered cynically. Their expressions now were subdued, perhaps contrite, or simply curious. She even saw an older couple who used to greet her with stiff politeness, now nod in genuine respect. It felt like a victory, albeit one overshadowed by the knowledge that deeper biases lingered. The event concluded with an announcement. Roman Eastman would fund a new citywide mentorship program named in honor of Brianna's late mentor from her early career, bridging law enforcement and community youths through job shadowing and training. Moved, Brianna hugged Roman, whispering thanks for honoring her personal journey as well as the broader cause. Walking out into the crisp night air, she breathed in the swirl of possibility. The same mansion that once symbolized wealth and exclusion had transformed into a platform for unity. She recalled the early humiliations, Officer Grant's rough grip, the suspicion in his eyes, and contrasted it with the scene she just left. Constructive dialogues, shared visions, and unwavering acceptance of her rightful place among them. In that moment, she felt a profound release of lingering pain. No single event could erase centuries of inequality, but strides had been made. The police department had begun adopting new regulations for off-duty assignments, limiting the unchecked authority that Grant once wielded. Her nonprofit soared on fresh waves of funding, enabling life-changing opportunities for countless marginalized entrepreneurs. She decided it was time to forge forward, unburdened by the past. The next steps would involve broadening her philanthropic network, pushing for statewide policing reform, and scaling her microgrant program. Freed from fear, she saw a path to genuine institutional change, a path lit by her unwavering refusal to accept mistreatment. Glancing back at the illuminated mansion, Brianna allowed herself a satisfied smile. She'd been humiliated once, but had turned that moment into a catalyst for progress no one could have predicted. In a society that too often tries to dismiss or ignore such moments, she proved that even in the glittering realm of billionaires, truth could shine brighter than any crystal chandelier. Thank you for following Brianna Lewis on her courageous journey, from a humiliating confrontation at Roman Eastman's opulent mansion to the sweeping changes that empowered her nonprofit and ignited policing reforms. Through determination, unwavering allies, and sheer moral conviction, Brianna exposed a pattern of prejudice that often operates in secret. Her victory illustrates that one act of injustice can spark a collective outcry, transforming a single night's shame into a triumph felt by those who've long been silenced. If you found this story inspiring, please like this video to show your support, share it with friends who value resilience and justice, and subscribe to this channel for more uplifting stories where truth prevails against daunting odds. Together, we can ensure that moments of humiliation become catalysts for progress, forging a fairer future in every corridor, no matter how gilded or guarded. Thank you for watching and championing change.